We are live. Converse, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we're live right now. So I wanted to say hello, everybody. I've got Converse Contender on the channel right now, and I'm really excited about that because I noticed that Converse Contender is busy making a big splash on YouTube. I have a feeling that he's going to be really popular, and so I wanted to get in there while the getting's good. and get him on my channel before he gets really popular and he doesn't pay attention to the little people like me.
Oh, whatever. You're making a big splash yourself.
No, it'd be nice. I'd like to make a big splash, but right now I'm just a little fish in a big pond. And so I think it's a pretty good strategy that Converse Contender has. He's kind of reminds me of James with modern day debates in a way. And because James has this channel that he hosts debates. And last night I happened to tune into Converse's channel, and he had hosted a debate, I think with two Christians, but one of them had kind of a unique Christian perspective. And you were moderating that. You were actually trying to handle questions and moderating and doing all this stuff yourself. And it can't be easy because it's just a lot of stuff to try to run at the same time.
Yes, I'm actually I am a moderator on Modern Day Debates channel as well.
Oh, good. Yeah. Have you been on one of his channels where you've actually been into I mean, you've not just moderated in the chat, but you've also moderated on his channel?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Nice. So yes, I've moderated a debate on Modern Day Debate, and I've been in 2 debates on that channel as well, and planning on more. Actually, I might have a debate discussion with Inspiring Philosophy on there. So we've been talking about that. That may be really interesting.
That would be really interesting. And one thing about Inspiring Philosophy, aside from the fact that I think he has 127,000 subscribers on YouTube, he's a great guy. He's humble and he does a phenomenal job debating.
Yeah, when I emailed him and I was like, hey, listen, IP, like Mike, if you want, I think it'd be a very charitable thing if you wanted to have a discussion with me. And he was like, sure, you name the time, like when can we do it? He's like, well, the only thing with IP is because he's super busy, he's like, do you mind if we push it back until like 3 or 4, like at least 2 to 3 months down the road? So it may be as far as May before we even get to have the discussion. But
wow, that's
fine because I've got a lot of things lined up over the next month or so anyway. So that'll be neat.
Yeah, so that brings us to a good point, because I want to, and first, before I do this, I want to say I do see the chat and I see Jansen, George or Jorge, and Jordan all in there, 3 J names. So I want to say thank you for joining us. If I don't type anything, it's because it's kind of hard to type in here, but I will acknowledge you guys. If you have questions for Converse, put them in there and I'll go ahead and ask Converse towards the end. So we'll do that. But I wanted to ask you, so what brought you to, before we go to your channel, because you have this channel, he needs subscribers. So I'm going to put a link to the channel in this discussion so that
thank you so much. You're very gracious.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's a great channel. And I noticed again that you've got that kind of personality that I think will bring a lot of people over there. But I wanted to ask you, what do you have, or actually before I do that, how did you get to Christianity? So I'm assuming you're a Christian.
Yeah. So my story is, I'm 31 years old. I've been a single father for about 5 years. I've got an 8-year-old son, and then so now I'm getting married this year, or in about 7 or 8 months. So that's where I'm at now. But as far as how I got to where I am and how I became a Christian, I guess whenever I was young, like a small child, my grandma would always take me to church, and my grandma is one of those people who everybody that meets her is like, wow, your grandma's super awesome. Like, she's never met a stranger kind of person. And she's just always been like that. So I always kind of looked up to her. But I guess you could say by the time I got to high school, I'm a skateboarder. So I'm out, skateboarding, and I've got my hair spiked up and Liberty spikes and a mohawk and stuff like that. And I'm playing in punk rock bands, and I'm really interested in hip hop and cars and things, things like that. So I was pretty normal I was pretty secular, I guess you could say, although I had that background. And then whenever I got to high school, I mean, I pick up drinking a little bit, here and there at parties and things. And then by the time I am in my college years, I'm, doing all the things that you would expect, smoking weed, doing different drugs and drinking and things like this, things that I shouldn't be doing. And then I guess you can say I had my son at about 23. And after that, I guess I started trying to get my life together. And I started asking questions like, what should I believe? And so I started really getting into philosophy a lot. So from about 20 to 30, I spent that whole time just like being super into philosophy and things like this, theology. Although I didn't really become a Christian that I would call a Christian until about, I guess, 27 or 28. But so I guess it kind of, I kind of had believed in Christianity in a sense. This is the strange thing, SJ, is I kind of believed in Christianity before I was a Christian. So like I'm listening to debates, when I'm like 22, 23 with William Lane Craig and John Lennox and a lot of other people debating atheists or whoever, Jehovah's Witness and this kind of thing. And I catch myself rooting for the Christian. And I'm like, he's making the best points. He's got the best argument. So I'm almost getting that and then fighting it like, yeah, but, the Bible says some things I don't agree with, that kind of thing. So I guess what really got me was at some point, I remember looking at the character of Christ and saying, wow, this guy's interesting. He's going in, kicking over the money changing tables and like calling everybody out on their hypocrisy, even the religious people. He's saying there's no difference between Jew and Greek, so attacking racism. He's saying there's no difference between male and female. He's saying there's no difference between slave and freeman. Like this guy is doing all these things that, got him killed in his culture. Like, and I just thought, wow, that's interesting. Then I read things like him saying, he didn't say, I know the truth. He said, I am the truth. And I thought, wow. So when I look, I ask myself, who is ultimately reliable? Who could I consider reliable to believe that they might know what God has revealed? And then I looked at Christ and I thought, who else? So I guess that's the way I got there, is by looking at the person of Christ and his example.
I think that's a great way. That's the best way I think I've ever heard. So I think that's wonderful. And that's one of those things too. And that's how I got brought back, because I left Christianity. I was a weak Christian for about 20 years. And I read C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. And there's that trilemma. And I thought, because a lot of people would say he's just a great prophet. And I thought, and he said, either he's Lord, because he called himself Lord and he forgave people, or he's a lunatic or something worse. And yeah. I thought to myself, wait a second, he's got a point there. I can't just think of him as a great prophet or a good teacher.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's kind of what I did as I looked at that. Even some people will say legend now, right? But that doesn't negate the fact that you have to either say this guy Christ, who is claimed to be this historical person, said not that I know the truth, but I am the truth. Mm-hmm. So you either have to say, this guy's walking around claiming that he is the truth is crazy, or he knows, or he's accurately revealing God. I mean, I don't think there's a way out of that. So I agree with you. I think that's you have to pick one way or the other on that.
I agree. So those are really good points. And I want to say thank you to the audience. If anyone just joined us, and thank you for coming in. I see Gavin and Matt and Jordan and all kinds of this one guy. So there's a lot of people, and this one guy was concerned that no one could see him, but we can definitely see him. So we can see all of you and want to say thank you. Also, I wanted to ask you, so you're going to go and debate actually, you already said you had 2 debates. Who did you debate on Modern Day Debates?
So I debated Jim Majors on the Trinity. That was interesting. And I debated Tom Jump on the definition of atheism.
And I know both of those two. And I haven't debated Tom Jump, but I definitely I've debated Jim Majors. He's actually a nice guy. They're probably both pretty nice people. So
yeah, I like both of those guys. Yeah. I get in trouble because I'm friends I get in trouble because of my affiliations, my association. So, you know, I've been away from YouTube for about 4 years. So I used to have a channel, and I used to be on G Plus and all kind of hangouts with. I was in a lot of the old GMan versus the world hangouts and a lot of the other ones that were going on back then.
Wait, stop for 1 second. GMan, the GMan?
Yeah. GMan used to have these hangouts called GMan versus the world. There's still some out there that you can find me in if you look deep enough from like maybe 3 to 4 years.
Wow. I know G-Man is one of my buddies. I like G-Man. I had him on my channel not too long ago.
So I've been kind of I don't really know as much about G-Man anymore because I've been away for a while. But back then we used to, not just him, but a lot of people had hangouts back then that we would all, that's when Google Hangouts was popular and G Plus was the thing. So I wasn't really big on YouTube because we mainly did things on G Plus at that point, but now G Plus is gone. So, but yeah, back then I had a lot of conversations, and now that I'm just getting back, I'm kind of learning the dynamics, how things have changed. So for example, I'm a moderator on Steve McRae's channel, and you know, I'm a friend of Dragnot, and like I'm a friend of like all these different groups that like I really like Tom Jump, and I like, you know, Jim Majors and all these people, and I'm starting to see how the dynamics behind the scene works, where these certain groups don't like these certain groups and these don't, and I like a lot of those guys. So I'm you know, as long as they don't have anything negative to say about me, like I'm, you know, fine with being friends with all of them. And so sometimes I get a little pushback from one side going like, well, you're friends with this guy, and I'm like, look, you're not gonna talk me out of being friends with somebody, you know, like it's just I think he's interesting, I think he's got good points, good arguments, you know. So that's all I wanted to say, was that I'm starting to recognize some of the dynamics of the of YouTube and the Great Debate community as a whole.
That is so funny, because I actually, on Facebook, I'm following Great Debate Community, and I don't do much on Facebook, so I rarely go in there and really pay too much attention. But all of a sudden, I'm getting all these friend requests from Steve McRae's friends because I follow.
Well, you know, by Great Debate Community, I mean what we've all, like the debate of God. Like, I don't mean the specific channel, because like that's an old saying. I don't mean to like promote a channel or anything. That's just it's an old saying. Like the Great Debate Community is the community of believers and non-believers that debate about these topics. So you know, that's where I'm coming from with that in general. But but yeah, like I say, and I'm interested in your work as well. I'm watching a lot of your content, and I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. So going back to that, see, here's what happened. So for anyone who, because I'm going to bring people up to speed on my perspective, and then you can see if that's also your perspective on this atheist divide that we've kind of been noticing lately. So what happened was, about a year ago, everyone seemed like they were really good friends. And they were going to conferences. Like there was one in Texas. I forget where in Texas exactly. I think it was in Dallas, but it was something, I'm forgetting what it's called. But a bunch of them went to that, and it was like the Doubt Conference.
The Reason Rally, or I mean the
Faithless Forum, I think it was.
Faithless Forum, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of them went to the Faithless Forum. So Jim Majors, you just mentioned, and Kyle, who was Steve's partner for a while, and Shannon and Paula Gia, and all kinds of atheists were at that. And then also even Ocean, forget his last name, but the Polytheist. Yeah. So they were all there, and they all looked like they got along really well. So I was following those videos on that whole thing. And then all of a sudden, what happened was Steve and Kyle had a falling out. And right before they had a falling out, I had Steve on my channel, and I didn't know that they had anything going on. So they had this terrible falling out, and then everyone picked sides. And I think that's where sort of a lot of it is today. So some people went to Steve's side and some went to Kyle's side, and it's sort of kind of gone off from there. And then Steve actually likes to make a lot of enemies of just anybody. He'll say whatever he thinks. And so he's got actually a lot of atheists against him.
Yeah. It
just
really
on his own.
Sure. It really splintered after that. I think before that, though, I think there were definitely people within those groups that did not care for each other. And so, so I see both sides at some point that, but I do like Steve, because I think that Steve is smart, because in an academic way, because he wants to be intellectually honest. So you'll never see Steve do this thing where he goes in and goes, oh, look at this verse in the Bible, and because he knows I don't study the Bible every day. Steve would rather go, what's your argument for that? And then hear it. So I think he's smart for that, but I think he could be a lot more popular if he would just toe the atheist party line. And so I think that he, like, for example, he used to be good friends with Aaron Ra. Like they were on each other's channels and so forth. But he questions Aaron on a lot of things like, for example, the term faith and different philosophical things where Alex Malpass and other people will say that, like, Aaron's wrong on this. But Aaron, he has this stick and stay is bound to pay mentality where he's just like, no, I don't care what that says. Like, oh, gosh. So I think that, but then again, I'll listen to some other people on the other side and I go, well, they're pretty reasonable. I like that. I like them as well. So I think there's strengths and weaknesses to both of their arguments. But again, you see this as well in the believer community. So I don't want to just say that, atheists do this, because atheists, like it or not, Christians, there's a lot of intellectually honest atheists, not only intellectually honest, but there are some atheists that have a very high intellectual capacity as well. So I don't want this to be something where I'm like, well, look at atheists, they just argue amongst themselves. It happens on both sides. I just want to make that clear as well.
Those are great points. I agree with you, actually. And I would say the same thing about Steve. And I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right. He won't pull Bible verses out of the Bible and pull them out of context and then ask you to explain them. That's not his approach. Yes.
He'll just tell you, he goes, I don't know that much about the Bible. I mean, what do you, like, even if it comes up, he'll go, what is your, okay, so they brought up that Bible verse. What's your argument for it? And then you'll tell him and he'll go, I can see why you would say that. And then he'll move on. He'll be like, but what about philosophically? How does this make sense? He'll want to move on. And so I think that's smart of him to, because here's my thing, and we're kind of talking about how atheists and believers have conversations. There's a little bit of arrogance, but also there's okay, so my approach isn't to go, look at this, I have a proof. My approach is always to say things like, well, consider this, or doesn't it stand to reason the following? And so, like, for example, Christians read their Bibles every day. They study their Bibles. Like, that's what they do. Now, granted, there are some that don't, I'm sure. But I'm just saying, of the ones that do, they sit there and study the Bible every day. And then when I see non-believers come to the Bible and they go, well, look at this, and then they claim that they have a better interpretation of the Bible than we do. Sometimes I like to ask them little facts about the Bible that are basic. And then when sometimes they can't answer, like just a basic thing. And I'm like, you read through that whole chapter and you didn't see where this said this 8 times in that chapter? Well, it's been a long time since I've read it. And like, I don't blame them. I mean, like, I won't fault you for not knowing something, but rather what I would say is, don't make such a strong claim. Be a little more humble in your claims. Like, this appears like it says this. Could you be wrong about your interpretation of it? And then let's have a discussion about it. That's much more reasonable. And in philosophy, people do this. A lot of philosophers, they tend to take the least strong or assertive state positions as possible. So, they won't say something like, so a lot of philosophers don't want to say there is no God. They want to limit it and say, well, somebody might say that there probably is no God, or someone may say, I don't see evidence for God, or something like this. But you want to try and take the least strong position possible. That way that you don't look foolish when it falls apart, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking of, I mean, I think we come on the same, the thing is we're trying to figure out how to bring people in. And I think when you do go out there and you start, I'm just noticing in the chat, somebody mentioned hellfire and that kind of thing. I think that those are the wrong ways to go about it. And I think also with respect to the Bible, you know, what's a common thing to me is the book of Job. Have you read the book of Job?
Yes. So
When
I'll give you my opinion as well whenever you get done with the.
Yeah, I want to say something, because that particular book, and you're about to debate Skylar Fiction, and Skylar has made a bunch of videos against IP on the book of Job, and IP has a take on the book of Job, and I remember a lot of atheists coming to me and say, why did Job get what he got from God? It was a bet from Satan. It's just because he bet Satan and all this kind of stuff. And IP's take's a little bit different, but I went and I read Job over again, and I thought to myself, wait a second. Job was very self-righteous, and he thought that his actions could get him into heaven alone. And God was just showing us that faith is really important. And so even though Job had everything and then God took everything away, he still maintained the faith. And that's what was important to God, not that he could show that he was this self-righteous person.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take. So, but I think when atheists, like, they'll pull that and they'll just ignore that part about the many comments that are in that about Job's friends basically scolding him and saying you're being self-righteous and you think you're so perfect. They ignore that part, and they'll just start saying, well, Job was perfect and look what God did to him. So
there's some other interesting passages in that same, there's some other interesting verses in that same passage that I don't necessarily want to get into because it would take us off into other areas. But right after God's talking, you know, he bring it. There's some things that are mentioned in passing if you didn't understand what they mean. And this may come up tonight in our discussion, my debate with Skylar Fiction. But I wanted to point out one thing though about what you said about somebody in the chat. So I'm unable to see the chat to everybody right now because I'm on my cell phone. I'm at property that I'm getting ready to sell. I'm going to be out here by the 20th, so I'm getting a lot of things done, and so I'm not at my house right now. So I'm not able to look at my computer at the chat. I just want to make that clear. But, you know, I've had discussions with other Christians about this fire and brimstone preachers versus, you know, let's say an evidentialist or a presuppositional preacher or teacher or discussion. And I think they could both be effective. It's not something that I would do. Maybe it's just because of my temperament or something, but so for example, I had philosopher Ben Arbor on my show maybe a month or so ago, and Ben said that he originally kind of got convicted by a preacher that was preaching on a college campus he was on, and he was a Helen fire and brimstone preacher. But we talked about that, you know, and we discussed, and I guess God could use both to convert people, or you know, Christ said, "My sheep hear my voice." But I'm with you. I don't think that is effective. Or I would say that it wouldn't be effective coming from me. I just don't have the temperament for it, and I'm not interested in it. But also, one of the things about me, like my approach, is that I take the approach that I start with the study that's been done, that people who are confronted with beliefs that contradict their beliefs cling tighter to their beliefs. So if I go in and I start shouting at atheists, a lot of times they're just going to cling tighter to their beliefs because it's contradicting what they believe. And theists did this as well, but I just wanted to point out that that's my take, and that's why I go about apologetics the way I do.
I think that makes a lot of sense. This idea of, and we do it the same thing. We become entrenched in our beliefs when we feel like we're going to battle against somebody else. So we put up the fences and we hunker down, and we basically will go for anything our people on our side say. And that's why I actually did a video this morning, and I'm going to release it on Friday, on street epistemology. And the whole theory behind that is that you develop friendships with people, and that's how you bring them to your opinions. or are you bringing them to at least listen to your opinions versus us versus them? Because that doesn't work, just like you're mentioning.
Sure.
But I want to go back to, you said something just before this, clinging to the beliefs. Oh, hellfire and brimstone. So have you heard Ray Comfort?
Yes, I am familiar with Ray Comfort.
So that's his approach. And I was like, I made a video on how I didn't really agree with that approach, because I teach human resource management. That's one of the classes I teach, and I teach leadership. One of the ways you motivate people is not, you have the choice of the carrot and the stick, right? So you can motivate it with an incentive.
Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Yes.
I wrote a paper on it in when I first started college, so I'm familiar.
You're right. And so actually, thank you for bringing that up, because if we talked about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic, so extrinsic gets into the carrot and the stick. So it's either you're going to get punished or you're going to get incentivized. Okay. The punishment never works. Sometimes the incentivization works depending on what people value. But what's even better is what you're talking about, which is intrinsic. And if you look at, there's a video by Daniel Pink, which is phenomenal. And he references, have you?
The Matchbox experiment?
Yes, that's the one. And he talks about purpose, mastery, and autonomy. I make my students watch that.
Yeah, I actually wrote a paper on that. So basically, people were given money for how quickly they could perform this experiment. And the people who were told, hey, I just want to challenge you guys to for a competition, see who can do it. And the people that were motivated by competition did better than the people who are motivated by money.
Exactly.
Reward.
So there's something intrinsic. And he says your low level rote tasks, you can motivate people by money. But if you want high level creativity and innovation, you've got to motivate with purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And it speaks to the human condition. It's really, really actually spot on as far as the kinds of things we care about. We want to seek meaning and purpose and that kind of stuff.
No, I totally agree. And he goes on to talk about Google, how Google allows the Google Days or whatever, where they allow their employees to just, hey, work from home or the coffee shop or wherever you want, and you can develop idea, just as long as you're developing an idea and you present something when you come back, you can, just do whatever you want for these days, certain amount of days out of the year. And that's where Gmail and Google Maps and all these different programs came from, is they came from people on these free days just sitting around thinking, what would I like to have out of Google? Oh, I don't know. How about an email system? How about what about G Plus, or what about this or that? So I do agree with you on that. And I can see where you would draw a compare. I had never done that, but I can see where you would draw a comparison to apologetics there. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I draw a complete comparison, because I think about my own approach, even when I was doing the street epistemology video, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go into things like purpose, meaning, and the stuff that really matters. And I rarely talk about hell, because I don't think that that's effective. You're going to go to hell.
The other thing
what is that?
Well, here's another interesting thing is, I see heaven and hell in the Bible as anthropomorphic in a lot of ways, because if you think about it, if you think about the ways that heaven is explained, and we're talked about getting, new bodies that are not of the world or whatever, and then we're thinking of heaven as a spiritual place, but then we're like, it has streets that are made out of gold and a big pearl gate, and I'm seeing that as the Bible saying something like it's a really great place. It's humans trying to make sense of a place that we can't understand, if that makes sense. And then hell is it's explained as being infinitely dark and full of fire, which it doesn't seem like those two could necessarily exist in the same way at the same time. That is full of fire, but it's outer darkness. So I think what those are, it seems that they're anthropomorphic statements that tell humans, this is a really good place. That is a really bad place. Be careful. Like, I don't think they're descriptions. So I don't go to heaven or hell for anything like that, because I would say there's not enough, there isn't enough scripture to tell me that much about them. And so if there was a more in-depth, a more in-depth passage that revealed a lot more about them, perhaps I would use that more. But because it's more of a vague concept about, a place where you don't want to go and a place you do want to go, I just consider I want to be in God's presence. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that that speaks to what hell would be the lack of God's presence. And
Sure.
I don't know if people realize what God's presence does to a place. So if God's present, there's a love that bounds and unites people. But without that love, uh, what's left?
Yeah, I mean, that's what yeah. So C.S. Lewis and other people talked about this, and they said things like, you know, if you like lusting, you can do it all you want in hell, but you're not going to derive pleasure from it because pleasure is from God. Like you can live there, you know, but you're not going to have health because health is, you know, obviously a gift from God. So things like this, you know, so, and I think that's probably a good way to look at it because there just isn't enough descriptive language to let us know the specifics about these places. And I don't even know if we would be able to comprehend these places given, you know, even more description. I don't know if humans are even able to fathom what these places could be like. Like, what is a universe without, or what is a place like without God? You know, God's gifts. I don't know.
Yeah, and I want to build on that. You're going back to what you said with the golden roads and the pearly gates. I don't think that's anywhere in the Bible, unless I'm mistaken. I don't remember ever seeing a
I do
mention.
think it.
Oh, is
I
it?
think
Because it
I could be wrong, but I believe in
on
Revelation.
Revelation. Okay, okay, I have
Yeah.
to think
I
about.
mean, I don't have my computer with me, or else I'd look it up. But maybe you can look that up real quick, and we'll. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
no, if it says that,
but but I will just mention that.
but it's a common view. That's the thing. It's people. It's not just you didn't just make that up. There's a very common perception that maybe people crafted in their minds of like a stairway to heaven, or
Yes.
this idea of heaven in the clouds, or the
Right.
idea that there's a pearly gate, St. Peter standing there. I mean, it's very common stuff that a lot of people just, and I don't know where it came from. I just
Well, that's a good point. And maybe I'll speak to some of that. So you're right. Like for example, the clouds. So Christ said that he's the Son of Man that comes riding on the clouds of heaven. Now, this will get us into another topic that we don't necessarily have to go into, but that was the rider on the clouds was a title for Baal. So one of the nation's gods. And what Christ and what Daniel was pointing out, and what Christ is pointing out is, no, it's not your God that comes riding on the clouds. It's you know, Daniel's like, it's our God that comes riding on the clouds. And so I guess that may be where people start to get that from. But like another example is angels having wings, for example. As Dr. Michael Heiser just read a book, who I'm sure you're well familiar with, I know.
yeah, I
He
just
read a
read
book
it.
called Angels.
Yeah, I read Angels, and I just read his
Okay.
book Unseen Realm.
Okay, cool. So he read the book Angels. He's like, nowhere in Scripture does it say angels have wings. As a matter of fact, there's not the term angel. He just basically says is messenger. Like he doesn't even consider the sons of God as angels, which is interesting because I make that mistake sometimes where I say the sons of God are fallen angels. That's not what they are. Like that's what he points out is like angels are messengers, right? And the sons of God are something completely different. And that was the passage that I was referring to in Job that comes in that same little passage that it talks about the sons of God. So I didn't want to necessarily get into all that, but there are these common perceptions, mistakes that people derive that aren't from the text. I think you're completely correct about that. But of the ones that are there, I
Actually,
think that,
let me just say something really quickly.
yeah,
Revelation 21:21. So I was wrong as usual. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made of a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold. So, oops.
yeah. So that's what I thought. So, and I'm just going based off my memory. I didn't remember the verse or anything. But what I would say about that is the same thing that I said before, is that it seems that this is an anthropomorphic statement, something to have humans to understand, listen, this is a really good place. This place is majestic. It's something that when they were having hard times and they were, you know, they didn't have a lot of resources and the agriculture is doing bad or whatever it may be, they didn't have a lot of money or whatever. They're looking forward like, hey, this place, it's got streets of gold. You're worried about gold, like a little piece of gold now? I mean, all the streets are going to be made out of gold. You get what I'm saying? It's not I don't necessarily think that that's what the specific, because I see it as more of a spiritual place. So I don't know if it would have a material look like that. So that's something I would want to study more on as well, though. But that's my opinion on heaven and hell, is just that the language is used to indicate something. The same as when God is said to have repented that he made mankind. Like it's an anthropomorphic statement that goes, he didn't like what men did, because also there's another verse that says God is not a man that he should repent. So, you have to kind of look at some of these statements and go, well, is that just a way to explain to humans something that may not be human? Something that may not be of this world, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because there are a lot of verses that actually atheists pull out of Genesis that relate to that kind of stuff too. Oh, God was sorry. Well, if he's all knowing, why did he do that? And you think, well,
Mhm.
so
That's
you have
what
to
I
go back.
figured out. But if you were to just look up that, like one day I did this just as actually, I think I did it yesterday, or I did it the other day. I just looked up that verse out of just like, I want to see what Google pulls up for it, like the verse about God repenting that he made mankind. And the first thing that popped up, you open it up and it says exactly what I said. I was telling somebody, I'm like, I think it's just an anthropomorphic statement. Let me look it up. I looked it up and I pulled it up and it said, there are many types of anthropomorphic statements in the Bible, blah, blah, blah. And it gave all these examples. It had paragraphs and paragraphs of just like giving all these statements. Like, for example, when it says that God stretched out his arm, or God did this or that. It's just humans trying to explain things in a worldly manner. So I think we're pretty much agreed on that.
Yeah, I think, and actually what's really amazing is, I want to throw a bone out there for a couple of people. Cy Gart has a new book called The Works of His Hands. And also Daniel Ray has a good book that's got co-authors such as Susan, what's her name? Not Sarah Salviander and William Lane Craig. And it's The Cosmos, the Creator in the Cosmos. So there's some really good books that are out there that those two wrote, and Hugh Ross and a number of people, but a lot of them look at Genesis and they point to the fact that how would this ancient people, how would they, if you actually go through Genesis like Hugh Ross did and you look at that kind of stuff, he speaks to Genesis from the perspective of a person who was on the earth while the clouds were completely covering the earth as it formed and wouldn't be able to see the light in the sky. And then suddenly they can see light, but they can't see the specific suns until the clouds started dissipating. I mean, he went into all this stuff and then he went back to Genesis and he said, and I mentioned with Cy Gart too, is they said, well, wow, how are these ancient people able to put something so absolutely brilliant together? And so it's pretty neat.
Yeah. So.
Oh, I should say Daniel Ray's Story of the Cosmos and Hugh Ross's Creator in the Cosmos.
So feel free to stop me at any point, because some people may say I'm long-winded, but what I like to say is I like to develop my points in full. So,
I think that's great.
I was about to say, but I think those are kind of like the same thing, being long-winded. But so here's my view on this, is that I like that Hugh Ross and others do that. And I just watched Hugh Ross on Tom Jump's show. He had Hugh Ross on maybe last week or the week before.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. So I appreciate some of these conversations that Tom has, but yeah, that was a very interesting conversation. And I think Hugh did well, because a lot of the questions that Tom springs on people, sometimes they don't do as well, but Hugh seemed like he had heard those objections before, so he did very well. But what I would say about that is, I do think the Bible is accurate, and I do think that there's room in there for people like Hugh to make their assessments and to try and read through not only what it's saying, but like what is it implying. But here's the other thing I'd point out is God, it seems that it's a principle that God reveals things to people in the way that they could understand them. So, and I give this example. So, for example, there's a verse in the Bible that God has the number of hairs on your head numbered. Now, how I put it is, if God were to have said to the Israelites, I have all the molecules of your DNA strand numbered.
Yeah, exactly.
It would not have made sense. It would not have been written down. It would not be considered scripture. They would have just been like, he said gobbledygook or something. I don't even know what he was talking about. So I don't appreciate the questions from non-believers when they say, well, why didn't God just tell us about the Big Bang or about some other scientific, thing or whatever? God reveals things to people in a way that they can understand them, or else it would not be worth the time to even speak. It's like if I were to try to tell my son right now about the quadratic equation, I was like, x equals minus b plus or minus square root b squared equals 4ac over 2a. He would be like, I'm playing my iPad. He would probably say, leave me alone. I'm playing Pokemon or something, so I don't think that's a good objection. And I appreciate what Hugh Ross and others are doing in this way, where they're looking at the text. And the last point I wanted to make was a lot of Christians, I guess I'll start with this, is that a lot of Christians, they're almost afraid that if you try and look at the text and see an old earth, that you're not being honest with the text. But what I would say is that you need to keep in mind that this is from an oral tradition. These people were trying to preserve this in an oral way until they could write it down for prosperity or for posterity or whatever. So, like, for example, the language with the snake in the garden. Well, as Michael Heiser points out, like, the term there may be better off translated as the shining being that convinced Eve to eat of the tree. But the serpent language is there, okay? And it may be that, so for example, if Satan is a luminescent being, it makes sense like in Isaiah 14, where it says that, oh, day star, or oh, shining sun, morning star, how did you come to fall from heaven? Or like in the New Testament where it says Satan can appear as an angel of light. It makes sense throughout the text because it keeps talking about these luminescent beings, right? And then even in Job, I believe it's chapter 38, it talks about the same thing, the morning star, the shining person. But I want to say as well, the serpent language is there as well. So I think, though, that is for the oral tradition to tell the story in a memorable way that the children could memorize. Okay, so there was a snake that blah, and it also teaches them a lesson about staying away from snakes at the same time. Do you get where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah.
So I guess that's a long about way of saying we look at things and we say, yeah, but if I look at an old earth here, am I being honest with the text, really? And a lot of Christians, I think, are just so worried about that they could be reading into it. But think about like St. Augustine. He was saying that the earth could have been much older. He said that these probably weren't literal 24-hour period days because the sun wasn't created till the fourth day. That was his argument. Now, I know some people don't agree with that, but that was his argument back in the 4th century, before scientific research came out that showed the Big Bang or anything like that. So this isn't just some ad hoc thing where later on we see science and we try to read it in. But the last principle I wanted to mention, and I told you I could be long-winded, but is I think that it's a solid principle to say that we should both look at the revelation God gave in his word and the revelation God gave in nature, the book of nature and the book of Revelation, because if God created this universe and we discover something about it, if it's true, it's true. If it's true that the earth is 13.8 billion years old, then it's true even if God created it that way. So I just wanted to make those points, that God presented things to people in the way they could understand them. And then secondly, let's not be so afraid to look at what it may be trying to tell us without, taking a facile reading of the text, basically.
I agree with you. No, I think those are good. And I want to go back to what you said with Hugh Ross addressed that whole thing on day 4 with the sun and the moon, because how he addressed it is he said, again, going back to the cloud cover, he as a cosmologist and a person who knows astronomy and that kind of stuff, he's got a PhD in that. He studied the way that the earth would have formed. And he noticed that when the earth formed, basically it was a lot of water, just as described in the Bible in Psalm 104. And he also noticed that it was completely covered by clouds. And so at one point you're able to see, people say, well, what about all the plants coming before? Well, it could be that the plants were the sun was breaking through the clouds a little bit, but not very well, but you still get a little bit of light in the atmosphere. So from the perspective of the person, you say, okay, let there be light. They're seeing light from the perspective of somebody who's under a major cloud cover, but they can't see the sun until day 4, when suddenly the sun appears and it's, and God made the sun. Well, Hebrew verbs, a lot of times they didn't have all of these different tenses. So it could have been God had made the sun, that kind of thing. So it's just that the sun and the moon appeared at day 4. And so it actually really relates. It goes together.
I've heard that. Yeah. And I've heard that, that critique. And I think that it may be right. That's why whenever I said Augustine drew the conclusion that the earth might be older from saying that the sun was made on the 4th day. And so they're not literal 24 hours before that. And then I said, but that's what he came to that conclusion about what he believed. I know that people don't necessarily buy into that view. So that's why I said that, is because I know that there were arguments that were defeaters for that. All I was pointing out is that, and I know that you understand that what I was saying, that it didn't take science to come along to say, well, let's reinterpret the Bible. He was looking at it as far back as the 4th century. And another point I would make, if you would be open to it, is so on Modern Day Debate, maybe a week or 2 ago, Kent, what was
this is going to get good. Is it Kent Hovind?
Kent Hovind. Yeah, Kent Hovind debated, I don't remember the guy's name, but he was an old earth creationist, and he was a very bright guy. And I sent in a question, a super chat, and it was asked. And he asked Kent, he says, Converse Contender asked, what is the difference between literalistic and literal? And Kent just went, that's up to him to define what it means. I don't know what he means by that. What I meant by that is what John Lennox points out in his book, 7 Days That Divide the Earth, I believe it's called. 7 Days That Divide the Earth. I think that's what it's called. What he points out is, when you look at a text, if I look at the text, Christ says, I am the door. Does he literally mean I'm a doorway? Like I'm the doorway? Well, yes, that is a literal reading of it. But does he mean I'm a slab of wood with a door handle? That's a literalistic reading of it. And that's what I was pointing out, is that you have to be careful, even as far back as, even looking at like the age of the earth. Are you taking a literal reading, or are you taking a literalistic reading, where you think that if you can put anything besides a 24-hour day, that you are trying to change what it actually says? And I don't like the tactic that Kent tries to do, even though I don't dislike Kent. I don't think he's a bad guy or anything. I don't appreciate the tactic that he uses. Oh, well, you're just not submitting to the word of God. Okay, well, if you don't want to submit to the word of God, then, that's up to you. It's like, well, hold on a second. That's begging the question, because from my perspective, that's what you're doing. So I think those are some other interesting points to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I for some reason, I've noticed this with young earth creationists, and I'm actually an old earth person. I actually believe that the earth is pretty old, but for some reason with young earth creationists, it seems like some of them get kind of hostile against people like me who are old earth creationists. They really want their position to be believed, but I think they take the focus away from where it's supposed to be, because we're supposed to focus on Jesus, the New Testament, and the Gospels, and spreading the good news, and not be focused on if dinosaurs were interacting with humans 6,000 years ago.
Right. Yeah, good point, because I think you're right about this. And one of their main arguments seems to be, well, if a child opened the book and started reading it, they would get what I'm saying. But honestly, do you think that a child would understand Ezekiel and some of the other passages in the Bible? Do you think they could just open it up? And people are called, and Christ said, "My sheep hear my voice." So I would take that, also I would expand that to say that when you read the word, you're going to hear Christ's voice in the word. And there are many passages where you can't say, well, if a child read this, there would be, well, there are many things that you need to be at least, capable of understanding certain things. Like if you know the Near Eastern context of a lot of passages, you have a different understanding than if you have an understanding, if you're looking at it from a 2019 United States of America point of view. So I don't think that's a good argument. And I see exactly what you mean by that, because it seems like they couldn't be wrong almost. And I just don't think their arguments are strong enough to make that claim that if you don't adhere to young earth creationism, then you are not submitting to the scripture. It's just, I think it's non sequitur.
I agree. And the other issue that they don't address in their young earth creationism is they don't look at the fact that the genealogies from Matthew and Luke are slightly different in number. And so the way you reconcile that, or I think it's an appropriate reconciliation, is the fact that Matthew and Luke named the people they considered important through the history, and they might have skipped generations naming people, because maybe they had Rahab, for example, the prostitute, and then maybe they didn't name a couple of people after her, and then they named somebody else. And when people refer to somebody as a father, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the direct father. The word that they had for father was the same as the word for grandfather. We distinguish it, but they didn't have different words. So when, for example, when we say Jesus is the son of David, he's not the direct son of David, but he was the son of David. So it's
Right.
because that those words are different. So that's something they don't pay attention to, that the genealogies are different. And it's because, again, they mention the important people. But I want to go back to, what I'm going to ask you? I have predictions of what Skylar Fiction is going to do in the debate. So you want to hear my predictions?
Yeah, so that'll be tonight. Yes, at 8:30, I think, p.m. Eastern.
On Modern Day Debate, or on Skylar's channel?
No, on Skylar's channel, and I am interested in your predictions. I mean, I have my own predictions, but I'd like to hear yours.
I've listened to enough Skylar Fiction debates, and I know he does the same exact thing in all of them.
Well, let me say this: I have debated Skylar before, about 4 years ago. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah, so we've actually had a debate, and everything that you would think he'd bring up, he brought up. So. Go ahead, though. I'm interested in hearing that.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, see, I debated. Here's what happened. I debated him too. I debated on his channel. And when I went on, first I watched a bunch of his debates, and I saw him with Mike Winger, and I saw him with, I think IP was on. Yeah, IP. I definitely saw that. And I saw some other ones. And I thought to myself, if I limit Skylar and don't let him talk about the Old Testament, he's not going to have anything to talk about, because that's his main debate.
Yeah.
Because
well, he admitted.
Yeah.
He admitted one day when he was talking to Jonathan Sheffield, he admitted, I don't know. I don't know anything about the New Testament, really. I mean, I'm fine with Jesus pretty much and his character. I mean, but my concern is mainly the Old Testament. And you could tell in talking if you watch that talk with Jonathan Sheffield, even Dr. Josh has admitted he doesn't really know that much about New Testament criticism, because in that talk, they're trying to follow his logic. They're like, where's he going with this? And you can almost see Skylar like almost is like, he's like, I'm ready for a nap, because but I think he admits that. I'm not saying like it's necessarily a negative that he doesn't know the New Testament as much, but I'm just saying that because I think he does admit that. But with Jonathan Sheffield, it was very telling, because he goes into church history and the whole method by which the textual critics use to date and everything. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually did see part of that debate. I have to watch the whole thing because I didn't like what I heard in the part that I listened to, but I'm gonna have to go and listen to it again and go
yeah.
from there.
And maybe we can talk about that after your predictions.
So here's the predictions. Here's what he's going to do. He is going to bring up the book of Samuel, and he's going to talk about slavery in the Bible. He's going to suggest that God is ordering rape in the Bible. Even he's going to ignore the passage in Genesis that mentions that rape is completely outlawed by God. He's going to pretend that God is instructing soldiers to rape the Midianite women. He's definitely going to say that, even though that's not in the passage. It's just definitely not. And he's definitely going to mention, I'm looking at my notes here, what he's going to mention. Oh, he'll mention the laws about stoning homosexuals and about eating shellfish and that kind of thing. So he's going to mention all of these laws that were pertinent and made sense in ancient context, but don't make sense in modern times. But he's going to pretend that Christians still adhere to this stuff and we support slavery.
Right.
Because it's always the same. Those are his approaches.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's not going to bring those things up. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to bring those things up.
Oh, you are?
I have a different perspective than a lot of people on this. I mean, I don't have to bring those things up, but I'm more than willing and ready to talk about those things because I think my perspective on this, while I could be wrong about any of my theology at any point, and so I'm welcome to criticism and being rebuked, and I'm not above reproach. I think that I don't think that's the way he wants to go. But I mean, I'm open to it, and I think we'll probably touch on morality and a few things, but I've definitely got some questions for him. I'm sure he's got some questions for me, and let's just say that that doesn't concern me at all in the least. And I almost hope that he does. And so that will become clear if he does bring that up. I
want to mention Bill Bailey. There's a few people in the chat I want to say hi to. Brian Stevens, Gavin,
hey, Brian.
Susan, the Messenger Reveals that you had last night on your channel. And Sahi Luke. Sahi Luke said something very nice. So thank you, Sahi Luke. But they're asking who we're talking about. And I just want to mention it's Skylar Fiction. And at 8:30 tonight, if you haven't heard this part, Contender is going to be on Skylar Fiction's channel, and he's going to bring up the Old Testament.
So I'm gonna, I will be fine. Like, we haven't even decided what we were going to talk about. We just kind of said, well, it'll be general, we'll come on and we'll, whatever comes up, we'll let it be kind of, we'll let it just come as it is. And I'm definitely interested in that kind of discussion. One thing that I'm going to make clear at the beginning, and if Skylar's listening to this, he, obviously he'll be able to tell from this as well, is I'm interested in a discussion. Even if it's a debate, I'm interested in a discussion where we're trying to understand each other. So the principle of charity, I think we should use the principle of charity and try to be charitable enough to try and understand each other's arguments. Because when we had a discussion before, we had a debate years ago, and while I could tell he was trying to listen to what I was saying, it's like when I directly contradicted what he believed the Bible said, he would go, well, that makes it worse. He would go to like this, what do you call it? Like a rescue device, where we would abandon that point, and he would go, well, that makes it worse because look over here. If that's true, then look over at this passage. And then we would move on from that. And he interrupted me so much in that last discussion that we weren't able to come to any conclusions, or at least understand my point of view. But at least at the end of that, he admitted that. So that's I'd give him credit for that, because at the end of the discussion, he goes, hey, look, I interrupted you way more than you interrupted me. So thanks for coming on. But so at least he admitted that. But I would just point out, let's say the discussion actually happens and he doesn't kick me out. I jokingly asked him that earlier in Dragnauts Hangout or stream. I was like, Skylar, you're not going to kick me out of here as soon as I come on, are you? Because that would be pointless. But I don't think so. I think he's willing to have a discussion. The other thing I would point out is I heard him complaining the other day that nobody wants to come on his show, and he seemed to.
I did too. It's so funny you heard that.
He seemed to interpret that to mean that he was really good at debating, or that he, people were fearful. But honestly, I mean, obviously from our perspective, I think that we would say something more like, you need to listen a little better and be more charitable about what you're hearing, because, when somebody makes a point, like, for example, I remember making a point about how he said, well, why does God, this is in our last debate. He said something like, why does God why does he use things in the world? Like, why did he use Israel to do certain things? Or why does he use this and that to accomplish his goals? And I said, well, the answer to that is that God is a God of means. And by that, I mean, God uses means to bring about an end. The same way humans do. I use a hammer to bring about the end of a nail being hammered in a wall. I mean, like, God doesn't, he uses things in the material world to interact in the material world. And he goes, no, that doesn't make any sense. It's just a stupid argument. It doesn't make any sense. And then we moved on. And I was like, okay, but don't ask for an answer to a question. And then when you hear it, go, well, it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, maybe it doesn't. I mean, I'm not saying that it has to make sense to you, but it's an answer to the question. Like, that's, and it's biblical. So that's the last point I really wanted to make about our discussion tonight. Unless you have other questions, that's fine as well.
Oh, I'm looking forward to listening to it, because I'm excited that you're going to face this whole issue head on. Have you read, before I ask, I have 3 questions to ask you, but one of them is, have you read Paul Copan's book? I've read
some of, Is God a Moral Monster?
Yeah.
Book? Yeah, I've read some of it. Yes, I've read some of it. I have not read the whole book. I think that he's right about some of his points, but what I've looked more at Clay Jones's material. Clay Jones has looked in depth at the problem of evil in the world. And he started with genocide and rape, and he went through and looked at cultures and goes, all right, what did they do? And some of the things I'm not even going to say in your stream that humans do, because it's worse than you would, like, you're thinking of some bad things right now. It's worse than that, I guarantee you. So
no, I know, like with the Aztecs and the Incas, for example, it's grotesque.
Yes. The Rape of Nanking, that book, like some of the things that were brought out. So, we'll probably talk about, I'm going to bring up some of that stuff tonight, some of Clay Jones' research, and, we're going to talk about some of the, some of the moral issues and things like that. So I think that'll definitely be interesting. But yeah, I'm familiar with Paul Copan and his work, Is God a Moral Monster? I'm just not, I haven't read it comprehensively, so I don't want to.
It's a good book. I haven't read any Clay Jones, but I'm going to have to go pick that up. I just wrote it down so I can go grab that, because that sounds good.
Actually, let's see, who had him on? Capturing Christianity had him on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's I think he had him on his show, if I'm not mistaken.
Great.
But if you subscribe to Biola University, I think I have a YouTube channel I watch of them, and his videos, are on their channel, and he makes some great points. So, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fantastic. Now I want to, there's a lot of people in the chat. One of them, Messenger Reveals, you had on last night. And one of the things I thought was interesting about Messenger Reveals is his take versus the other person. They were talking a lot about determinism. And I'm curious to know where you stand on determinism, because I have my own opinion on it, and I don't want to salt your opinion with my opinion. I want to see where you stand.
So Messenger and I talked about that last night. And my take, I don't want to go in too deep, because it'll take me, because again, I like to develop my points in full. So so what that means is I don't want to be really long-winded about all this, but I believe in free will, because I believe free will is biblical. For example, when God says things like, choose you this day who you will serve, or when God says
Joshua 24.
Right, things like that. I think that it implicitly promotes, or at least tacitly lends approval to the fact that there's free will. I mean, think about even property laws like thou shalt not steal. It's tacitly saying like, hey, you're capable of stealing and you better not do it because you can be held accountable. Like, I mean, I just see that. Now, Messenger has some really good arguments from psychology and from, some of the interdeterminate factors, which I already kind of knew some of those arguments because I'm familiar. So what I say is, I don't have a defeater for hard determinism. And I admit that up front. So one thing I believe that people have liked about my style or my methodology is that I try not to go beyond what I know. So a lot of times I'll say, I don't know, or something like that. But with this, I would say I don't have a defeater for hard determinism, but rather what I would say is both the Bible seems to indicate that we have free will, but also our intuition and experience of the world seems to indicate strongly that we have free will. And while intuition and experience isn't always correct and doesn't always mean that it's not something that's veridical, so something that we sense doesn't necessarily have to be true because we sense it. So if I put a stick near water and it looks like the stick's bent, for example, my perception's just off. The stick's not actually bending in the water, for example. So I would just put it in that way. And I would say, I gave a quote to Messenger Reveals last night that I like. It's actually a quote about morality from an atheist philosopher, Louis Anthony. You'll see a lot of people used to use this quote. William Lane Craig used to use it all the time. And I don't have the quote right in front of me, but it says something like, any argument about moral skepticism will be built on less obvious premises than objective morals. An argument for objective morals is. And this is coming from an atheist philosopher, Louise Anthony. She's pretty bright. I like her. But how that applies to this is I would use that same statement about our intuition about free will and say something like, although I could be wrong about free will and my intuition could be off, any argument for determinism seems that it'd be built on less obvious premises than an argument for free will, if that makes sense, Steve.
No, I agree with you. I are you familiar with Molinism?
Yeah, I actually am partially a Molinist. Yeah, I mean, we got into that last night. I know you had to go, but I've been in. If you watch the streams on my channel, I've been deep into Molinism. So that's kind of what I explained to Messenger is that being a Molinist, I consider myself reformed because if you look at, like, for example, some of Dr. Kurt McGregor's material, Molinism is mostly reformed from Molina's point of view, but there are differences. It's not in the same way. So, for example, there's irresistible grace is resistible, for example. So yeah, I pointed out to him that God, so we had a question from Bob, who's on Steve McCrae's channel a lot. Bob said, if God knows what we will do, then we don't have free will. We're determined to do it. And I pointed out to him, no, if God has what we call middle knowledge, God knows what we would do given a circumstance freely, that what we would choose to do. But that doesn't mean that we could not have done something different. So there's a difference between what we could have done, what we would have done, and what we did, for example. So, and I made this point that God knows that we could have done, like, so if, and I gave an example, let me just do that because that'll clear it up and I'll kind of stop rambling here. I said, if I have a friend who is a drug addict and I know that he would sell my TV to do drugs, to buy drugs, if he comes downstairs in the morning and I have heroin or whatever laying on the coffee table, I know that he will do those, or given that circumstance, I know he would do the drugs. But that doesn't mean that he could have not done them. because he could have just chose to not do them. So in that situation, even though I set those drugs on the table and I set up the situation that I knew he would do them in, that doesn't follow that he then couldn't have not done them, because he could have. So that's the distinction I made there, and I see how you apply that, or why that followed from free will and determinism.
No, I agree. I agree with you, and I want to explain my view on that. And I'm also a Molinist. I believe that God knows what we will do under certain circumstances, and he puts us in the most optimal circumstances to find him. I think everyone on this planet is in optimal circumstances according to what he has put inside of us to make us the best we can possibly be. But I want to go into my idea on free will and determinism. Is I distinguished biological determinism, because that's what atheists refer to pretty much, from theological determinism. On the theological side, God basically, like you said, has set our path, and we're supposed to go down it, but we don't have to go down it. We can try to fight against him. That's why they call Israel was wrestling with God. But if we go back to biological determinism, I've got this little chart that I just made. I don't know if you can see it. But the idea is at the low level, at very low level skills, very low level activities, that's biological determinism. So if we're walking or sleeping or doing something like that, God knows that we're going to sleep. We're going to have to sleep just about every day. Most of us have to sleep every day. And so those low level activities are biologically determined in some way. But if you get to high level activities like making choices about God, or making choices that are big decisions in your life, well, that is where you have all the free will. So at the low level, sure, you can see biological determinism, but at high levels, sorry, we have free will. And I say sorry because there's a lot of atheists like Rationality Rules who make tons of videos on saying we don't have any free will, and because they're trying to eliminate their accountability.
Sure, and I can see where, because deontological moral systems, they say that you are accountable. They say that there's some obligation to morals. So I definitely understand why you drew that distinction. So, but what I want to point out is that I think you're correct. And I actually mentioned this last night to Messenger, and I said, I understand there are determining factors. So, for example, if I don't have legs, I'm not going to be a dancer. Like there are determinate like facts that limit what you're able to do. But that doesn't negate freedom of the will. Now, Caleb Cumberland, who's the dry apologist, I really like Caleb. He's a bright guy.
Yeah, I've listened to him.
He pointed out, there's a dichotomy between making choices for reasons or making choices randomly, but the choices being made randomly do not negate a free choice. So even if I choose something, let's say randomly, right, that doesn't negate that I had the power to choose that, or that. So, but one more thing I wanted to point out was, so I think that at this point, Christians who aren't Molinists are going to want to say, well, where are the Bible verses for this, right? Because Molinists claim that God has this middle knowledge, this knowledge of what, not only what humans will do as his foreknowledge, but what humans would do given a circumstance. And what we could do. What we could do. So I want to give a few verses just to kind of, preempt that argument there. So I like, for example, when David is running from King Saul, he's at a place, I believe it's called Keilah, and he asked God, if I stay here, will Saul kill me? And God says, yes, if you stay there, Saul will kill you. But David didn't stay there. He left, and Saul didn't kill him. So God knew something that would happen that didn't occur. So that tells us that he knows. So they may say, a lot of people try to take that verse and say, yeah, but that could be compatible with open theism or whatever. All right, so let's take another verse, like Christ saying, if Sodom, had seen what you've seen, they would have turned or whatever. I'm not quoting the verse, obviously. I'm just coming off memory. He's saying if they would have had this knowledge, they would have done this. Now, some people say, well, that's just hyperbolic. Well, I see it all through Scripture. The other day, I wasn't even thinking about Molinism, and I was reading, I believe, in Exodus, And there was a point where God was talking about, I believe it was the Canaanites, but I could be wrong about that, where he says, you're going to drive them out of the land, or you're going to, but you can't do it all at once. You're going to do it over a certain period of time. And he goes, because if you would have done that, the animals would devour you. And I wasn't even thinking about Molinism, or like, I was just reading it along and I was like, there it goes again. God knew something that would have happened had they done an action, a subjunctive conditional, or, the counterfactuals of like creaturely freedom. Like if they would have done this, this would have occurred. And I think that it's pretty plain from scripture, because I hear complaints all the time that God doesn't, the complaints against Molinism, I think are pretty simple. Does God have to, so God has to look at the future and learn about what you would do? What? How is that different from his knowledge of what will happen? It's like, it's just knowledge. He doesn't have to learn anything if he already knows it.
I agree with you. The people who make the argument against it a lot of times try to trap God inside a linear time, and they don't take into account the fact that God is concurrent in the past, present, and future. And so they'll say, they try to put themselves as God. Well, God is looking into the past or looking into the future. God is concurrently in that position. So it's super hard for us to be able to fathom that, because we're in linear time and that's all we know. But it's something that C.S. Lewis has spoken about, the time thing and how that impacts it. But also going back to your mention, I love the examples you use, because Michael Heiser used that same example with David running away from Saul. And
right.
he kind of said something to the effect that God must not have been right there. And I'm like, well, no, God said, if you do this, this will happen. It's basically, God knows what will happen in these situations.
Yeah.
And just like Jesus with Judas, Jesus said, okay, go do what you're going to do. Jesus knew what he was going to do.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. I agree with you on that. And so I think that it's not only biblical, but I think it only makes sense that if God is all knowing, that he would have this, what we call middle knowledge. He would know about the counterfactuals of creaturely freedoms.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that. I'm trying to see. Oh, you know what I was thinking about? For us to be able to understand God is it's like, imagine the person who plays chess. You know all of the moves. You try to figure out your opponent's moves, say 3 moves out or something like that. So you make a move and you're trying to guess 3 moves ahead. And imagine with God's kind of knowledge that we can't even fathom, is the world is just this gigantic chess game, and he can figure out exactly where to position people for they can maximize their winning basically in life.
So yeah, that's interesting, because that gets into, and we probably don't want to go off that far, but that gets into possible world semantics, where God, not only knows what would happen, he can, he has the vast array of what could happen to bring about his goals. And so if I, for example, we always fall short with our analogies, but if I was God and I looked at, and I thought about what reality would best bring about my goals, for example, if I wanted me to be a Christian, for example, I would make me a punk rock skateboarder growing up, and then I would have my grandma early on, being a super cool person, and like, all these things, or if I was, for example, if I were to have done something different, I probably would not have turned out the same. So if I would have went to Catholic school growing up, for example, maybe I wouldn't have turned into a Christian. Maybe I would have rejected and been like, Catholic school sucks. This is a common theme I see with non-believers is, no, I went to Catholic school growing up, and well,
what a coincidence. Do you know my past?
No, I don't.
I went to Catholic school growing up.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so, I left the church. It's because of the way that I wasn't happy with the way that they're managing the priests. And I left the church in my early 20s, and so did my family, except for my sister. And that's why.
Yeah. So, I'm not hard on Catholics. So I'm not going to, one of my good friends, dry apologist, is a Catholic. I'm not hard on Catholics at all. I just point out that everybody from Joe Rogan on to probably half the atheists on YouTube people tell me all the time. I just hear it all the time. Well, no, whenever I went to Catholic school, and like, I remember, okay, here's a point that you will probably appreciate. When I think I actually still have this clip from like 4 to 5, maybe, I don't know, between 3 to 5 years ago. I was on a GMan versus the world, and me and I said, GMan said, do you guys want to add anything? And I said, yeah, I'd like to add something. I'd like to ask the non-believers in the room, what is the gospel? And one guy goes, well, when I was in Catholic school, we were taught it's the gospel is the teachings of Jesus. And GMan just goes, no. It was so hilarious because you know how he is. Like sometimes he just like, I don't know. He just has like, yes, he has this delivery. Is just like, no, that's not the gospel. And he goes, that's not the gospel. That's the teachings of Jesus. He's like, what's the gospel? And so it was so funny because another guy come up and we knew that he had never been really big in Christianity. And he goes, well, we know it because you guys say it every day that Jesus died for you. And we started laughing because this guy is just like, you guys say it every day. Like, we know it. It was so hilarious. So that was interesting.
I'm gonna have to go back and find some of those old things if it's accessible anywhere, because that sounds like it'd be funny to watch.
Sure it is. Another one is Nephilim Free and we did a like a 4-hour and something hangout way back in the day handling the Nephilim from like 3 to 4 years ago. It was called like the Sons of God or something like that. And it was when I had a G+ account. I don't even know if I had a YouTube channel at that point, but we did a whole stream on the Nephilim, and we had people coming in to disagree with us, and they're like, oh, yo, what about this verse? And we kind of, okay, well, here's how that works out. And so that was really interesting as well. Might be something to look into.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would like to see that. I'm just looking at the chat and I see Messenger Reveals, and I have to disagree with Messenger Reveals, but he says Paul got some things wrong about Jesus, like the hidden secrets. Paul said the secret was that Gentiles would share in salvation. This is not what Jesus taught. I think that's interesting. I think we need to bring Messenger Reveals onto a debate.
Yeah,
debate
so
going last night.
I'm definitely going to have you guys on. So I want to have a debate. So you mentioned that you would like to debate him on a couple of topics, and I think that would be perfect. After the show, we were talking a little bit, and he was like, yeah, set it up. Let's do it. But I do think that, I guess you could say it was a mystery that Christ was going to eventually come back for the nations, that the Gentiles would be included. But at the same time, if you look through the Old Testament, you find that there.
Well, you see it in Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
52 and 53.
Sure. Yeah. But also, I mean, just think about a popular verse, Psalm 82. The last statement in Psalm 82 is, arise, O Lord, for the nations are your inheritance. Like, that's one of the most popular verses. But when I hear that quoted all the time, I never hear anybody say that last part. Or if they say it, they never break it down. They just go, well, they're talking about the sons of God, and they never go into that verse. So I just thought I'd point that out. That's another related verse.
Messenger Reveal says we may have a few things to sharpen iron on. It'll be fun. We'll keep it on a nice level. I have polite conversations with people and I enjoy them.
I'm definitely interested in that. So
good. Well, yeah, we can go on your channel. That'd be fun.
Definitely.
Well, listen, we're getting towards almost an hour and a half. We've had a pretty good time here. Should we figure out how to close it off, or?
I mean, I've got plenty of time. I'm like I say, I'm actually off work today. I don't have to do anything necessarily until 8:30 tonight. I mean, I've got some things that I'm doing around here, but I've got plenty of time, so don't worry about that. It's up to you.
Oh, wow. Messenger Reveals now. Oh my gosh, another topic. He and I might have to do a series. He and I completely disagree with Isaiah 52 and 53.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So this may be a trilogy of debates.
Oh my gosh.
And look, let me just say this too. If you haven't subscribed to SJ and you're watching, do it, because I noticed that SJ is almost at 1,000 subs. And just
I'm trying so hard too.
Yeah, I'd love to see some super chats coming in for people like me that's on the show. So definitely, if you're sub to me, sub to SJ, and let's get her over 1,000.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to put a link, as I mentioned before, to your channel so that people can go ahead and sub to you, because you just started this channel. You've got, I think, 70 people, and we got to get you. You're
I've only got like
993 short of 1,000. We got to get you to, or I'm sorry, 990. Oh, that was 7 people. 930 people. We got to get you.
Yeah. So, yeah. And, you know, I've been back on for maybe 2 months now. I made a YouTube channel, and then I was scheduling a debate with Jim Majors on the Trinity. And the next week, he wasn't able to do it that week. And then the next week, I was flying out to Hawaii. And so I had so much traveling going on. And so what I decided was, when I get back from Hawaii, I'll, you know, take YouTube more seriously, and I'll come on and do these debates and discussions. And, you know, I thought about that whole trip about, you know, discussions in general. And I was listening to a lot of audiobooks and things to kind of, just to kind of structure my way of thought before I came into any of these discussions or debates. That way that I know that I'm not just here to, for example, I don't want to be in an echo chamber. You know, I want to hear the best arguments from the non-believers. But whenever I got back, I decided, I emailed James at Modern Day Debate, and I said, hey, I'm back from Hawaii. Let's set this up with Jim Majors. And he came on, and he graciously just, you know, had a debate with me. And, you know, I really appreciate him for that. And then Tom jumped. He was willing to just have discussions with me. And then, you know, me and Steve McRae, you know, started having after shows and things. And then people started coming over, and they're like, yeah, I seen you on Steve's channel, and, you know, blah, blah. And they didn't know that we were, you know, that we were cool. And they were like, well, no, I want to have, like, Messenger Reveals, I think. He said, yeah, I seen you on Steve's channel. Now me and Messenger Reveals have discussions all the time. So, you know, it's interesting how that works. I actually have a book over on one of the shelves behind the camera called How to Sell Anything to Anybody. And I bought it like a long time ago. So, like, because I thought, you know, maybe this book will teach me about sales. And, you know, some of the things I don't really like in sales. For example, neuro-linguistic programming and things like that to try and fool people. But there was something interesting in that book called the 150 rule. And he basically said, when I went to funerals and weddings, I asked, how many chairs do you know how to put out? Because they're, you know, who might show up or whatever. And they said, we usually put out 150. And what he derived from that was, each person you talk to knows at least 150 people that they can talk to. And then those 150 people know at least 150 people they can talk to, and so on and so forth, that their friend, like, that would come to their wedding or their funeral. They know more people than that, but just that may come to their wedding or funeral, they know close enough to talk to. And he said, in sales, you know, for example, if you make a bad name for yourself, it spreads pretty quickly. And so, you know, I'm considering all these things when I'm having discussions, like, do I want to, you know, I just want to be fair to everybody. I don't want to straw man. I don't want to, you know, engage in bad arguments. And actually, I'm going to be on the Magic Sandwich Show on Friday talking about bad atheist arguments. So that's
really? Oh, yes. That sounds interesting.
Yeah. So Dragnot and those guys, they graciously invited me on. I think it's smart of them to do that, because a lot of people, I think, look at that whole group and say, you know, it's kind of an echo chamber. But then it's like, well, they're willing to have this discussion on bad atheist arguments and make fun of those. So, and they were gracious enough to invite me onto it. So obviously they're good guys.
Yeah. Well, it sounds, and you know, there are atheists who go against, and they're bad Christian. I mean, we have to always remember that they're also, on the flip side, there are some arguments that Christians shouldn't make either. Such as the old no true Scotsman. Well, no Christian would do something like that. Right. Well, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, sure. You know. I mean, I agree with that. You know, I mean, the Scotsman thing, it only goes so far though. Like, if somebody says like, oh yeah, this mass murderer is a Christian, it's like, I mean, he's not, but like, that's not necessarily the true Scotsman fallacy. You know, there's specific usages of that fallacy. So I think you're right though, because a lot of Christians do use that, even for, like, for example, Catholics or somebody that they don't consider Christian. So
yeah,
I agree with you.
Susan asked, before I forget to mention Susan's question, she wanted to know if you're familiar with, and I'm not familiar with this, Chris Date and Rethinking Hell.
What was it?
The name is Chris Date And I guess it must be a book, Rethinking Hell.
It seemed like I seen him give a speech at a church, like a sermon on YouTube, but I'm not familiar enough to say I know that. So I wouldn't want to comment on it, honestly.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that either. So that's and I'm just seeing, and it says Sahi Luke is just saying Chris Date defended the person of the Son with two natures and demolished Dale Tuggy. It's something I'll have to watch too. Yeah, I'm not either.
Maybe that's something I'll look into.
So as far as, and Alex Armstrong's asking for my view on Isaiah 53. I'm going to say one really quick story. When I was doubting, when I was in this state for about 20 years, as I mentioned, after I left the Catholic Church, I was kind of getting to the point where I really wanted to know the truth. And I was reading all these Eastern books, and I had this idea that Buddhism was superior and all that kind of stuff. And next thing I know, I'm on a business trip flying up to Virginia, Alexandria, and I'm flying up there, and but before I got on the plane, I see this man, and he was really ethereal. He was very tall. He had kind of blondish grayish hair, and he had this kind of like, there was something about him that just stood out. And I was kind of looking at him probably a little bit too much, because I thought there's something about that guy. It's almost like he was angelic. I mean, he's just standing out to me. And I go and I sit on the plane, and it's one of those planes where you have seats are already pre-chosen. So I sit on the plane, and he sat next to me, and his wife sat next to him. And so he's in the middle seat, and he struck up a conversation. And next thing I know, he convinces me to read C.S. Lewis's books, which I had never read as adult books. And then he said, you know, who am I describing? He said, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities and he went on and on about this sinless person and the servant. And I thought, well, geez, that's kind of obvious. That's Jesus. And he's like, yeah, it is. That is Jesus. You know, that's written over 700 years before Jesus even walked the earth. And I thought he must be about, oh, that can't be true. And I mean, I can't believe that's in the Old Testament. It's super obvious. And so I went home after I got off the plane. Actually, I went I went online and I looked up the Jewish scriptures, because I thought, well, how could the Jewish people have this in their own scriptures and they don't see it? And so there was the verse in their scriptures. So I just still am blown away by that, because they say that represents Israel, but they don't address that Israel's certainly not without sin. So Israel, you know, is obviously a very sinful nation, as reported numerous times in the Old Testament. So it goes against that argument just from that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that verse, like you hear it read and you go, yeah, the Apostle Paul, right? No, the Old Testament. But, you know, and I've heard different arguments against it. I don't think that they make enough sense to be a defeater for that position. So I do take that it's, you know, that it's a good prophecy. I like Michael Heiser's take on a lot of this stuff. A lot of prophecies seem to have dual fulfillment. So there will be things in the text that can be applied to the person that they're currently speaking of, but then there are things in the text that can't be applied to that person. You know, for example, the prince, like a prince or whoever they're speaking of. So I would take Michael Heiser's view on that there are dual fulfillments of certain prophecies. But, you know, I try to stay away from some things, not necessarily that, because I think prophecies something I definitely like. But like, for example, eschatology, for example, I don't push a view. I don't take views on it. Like, I think Michael Heiser's right that every view of eschatology has problems. So you know, that's a certain type of prophecy that, you know, I just don't necessarily have an opinion on. But I think you're right about Isaiah 53 and others like that. That point, like, for example, was it Isaiah 9:6?
Yeah, that's the birth of Christ.
Yeah. So, and he will be called the mighty God and things like that. You know, some people say, well, that's talking about, you know, somebody in that time that's being born. And it's like, was he called the mighty God? You know, like something that's interesting about the birth of Christ, since you brought it up, and this is just the way my mind thinks. Maybe it's ADHD or something. So forgive me for this tangential point. But something very interesting about the birth of Christ, that, because you mentioned cosmology earlier with Hugh Ross and so on and so forth, and I'm just connecting dots. But Michael Heiser and some others got together with a cosmologist or I'm sorry, an astronomer, I'm sorry. And they looked at when was the birth of Christ. And, people always say, it wasn't December 25th because, and it makes sense. It wasn't around Christmas time because it says there were shepherds in the field. And why would there be shepherds in the field in the middle of winter? So, but a really interesting point is if you take Revelation, the book of Revelation, and you plot out where it describes the Messiah being born, it talks about constellations. It says, it's talking about the Virgin Virgo. It says I don't want to screw it up, so forgive me if I say it the wrong way, but you'll get the point. It says something like when the sun is at her midpoint and the moon is at her feet or something like that. And it says basically that's when the Messiah was born. And when they plotted that out around the time of Christ, when that could have been possible for that constellation, they come up with the date of his birth at September 11th.
Really?
That's very interesting, huh?
I have heard September, and I think I have heard September. I've heard that somewhere. I don't know where I've heard that.
Yeah, when I first heard that, I thought that's kind of like at least serendipitous. It's not like scary.
Yeah.
All these things happen September 11th,
I would like to point out something that people might not realize with eschatology a little bit, because it's something I've been looking into lately. If you think about this, so we know that in Daniel and in Malachi 3:1, for example, it points to the fact that the anointed one's going to appear in the temple. And we also know that Daniel portended that the temple was going to be destroyed. And the temple was destroyed in the year 70. And everybody scattered. So the Jews scattered, the diaspora, they call it, scattered all over the planet. And that was also predicted. You can read through the Old Testament. There's verses that predicted that they would be scattered all over the planet. And what's really interesting is which country in the world came back to be after thousands of years. So we've got, after around 1900 years or so, just a little under 1900 years, in 1948, I forget the date, I want to say it's May 1st, 1948, we've got Israel forming. And that was actually, we know that Israel has to be around in the end times. And so now I guess there's a group over in Israel, they've called themselves the Sanhedrin, and they're talking about the temple. They're talking about building a third temple. And so we also know that third temple is going to be where the Mahdi, and I'm saying Mahdi because I've actually looked into also the Muslim book, their Antichrist their Christ is our Antichrist.
Right.
the Meda. It's very scary, actually, if you look at that. And it's also, if you look at people like Ahmadinejad, I can't say his name, Ahmadinejad or whatever, the guy who was a former leader in Iran, wanting to do something to Jerusalem. What's the name?
Was it Ahmadinejad?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. I can't pronounce it. But he wanted to, basically, he was talking about doing something to destroy Israel because he wanted to bring on chaos, because according to their book, that's going to bring on the Mahdi. And so it's really scary because they actually, if you look at the Muslim books, they actually draw parallels between our revelation and our Antichrist with their Mahdi. So,
yeah. So I'll make 2 points about this eschatology. One is, I follow a scholar named Ken Johnson. I believe I have his video, at least one of his videos about the early church fathers in my in a playlist on my channel called The Trinity, I believe, just because I needed references for my debate, The Trinity, that I had. Ken Johnson has wrote the book on the early church fathers. So literally, he's wrote the book on the early church fathers, their beliefs and all that stuff. So
I'll have to get that. Ken Johnson?
Yes. So if you just look at his YouTube channel, he just started going live and doing certain live discussions, but his videos, a lot of them are classic, especially the early church fathers. He points to a lot of things that are very interesting. Mainstream scholars don't. I'm sorry, are you still there?
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting.
Sorry, I faded out for my screen went black for a second. But he also talks about eschatology, and he claims that the early church fathers only had one view, and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into that because I don't study it enough to, it doesn't necessarily interest me enough. But I'm getting more interested in it as I'm looking into things. But he has some very interesting views, and he talks about not only the early church and what they believed about it, but he does what you were doing, and he looks at Israel and the prophecies and the things that you're pointing to. So, that's a definite, definitely I understand that view, because I see it from him. But the same point I want to make is the reason why I'm hesitant about looking into eschatology is because of Christ's warnings about not knowing the end of time, or not knowing the days. And so I don't think it's wrong to look into or anything like that, but I would just say that kind of told me that maybe I should put my studies elsewhere.
Excuse me.
That maybe I should put my time into my studies elsewhere. And so there's so much stuff I'm interested in. So I'm interested in psychology, and I'm interested in philosophy, I'm interested in theology, and I'm interested in all these topics, linguistics. Like, I'm reading an interesting book on Audible right now about the language families of the world, and how Indo-European and all these different languages developed, and and how it relates to different scripture. And Michael Heiser obviously goes into a lot of that with his Near Eastern literature. So I guess what I do is I kind of prioritize what I'm, and while I'm out right now, starting January, I'm going to be, back in class, finishing up my associates, because I never finished it because I had a son early. And so I'm going to try and finish my degree, and then,
That's
get
great.
bachelor's. Yes. Yeah, so all this stuff I wish I could have been doing over the last 10 years, but instead I've been I'm an apprentice to a dental laboratory, so I've been sitting in the laboratory all day as a tech, and listening to audio books and listening to debates and discussions all day long. For like, I went to Verizon Wireless one day a while back, and they were like, use like 30 gigs a month or something. And they were like, it's crazy how much you actually use because of YouTube. But anyway,
I do the same. I ride my bike almost every day, and I listen to audiobooks and YouTube videos that educate me on something.
Oh, wow. Are you married to James White?
No.
Are you familiar with James White?
I feel like I know that name. Who is that?
Oh, wow. James White he goes way back. Now, he's a Calvinist, okay? But he's super bright, and he has a lot of really good resources. So James White has been doing debates for like 25 years. You can look up his debates on YouTube. Everybody you can think of, he's debated with them. Robert St. Genus, Catholics, you can think of all the Muslim apologists that you can think of. He's debated them. He debates in mosques all around the world. He debates Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, you name it. So he's a very valuable resource, and he's I think he was a professor at Grand Canyon University, I want to say, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, he's debated Bart Ehrman and so many more people. He's a really bright guy. I disagree with him on some things, but I would definitely recommend you look at his material because of his textual criticism knowledge. But the reason why I brought him up is because that's exactly what he says all day long. Is I was riding my bike yesterday, and on my ride, I listened to blah, blah, blah. Like, even so, to the point where now there's this Christian apologist preacher that's, criticizing him all the time, saying James White, who's a bike rider, but is a part-time apologist, but a full-time bike rider.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. So
no, my neighbors joke around because they're like, are you giving that bike some more exercise? Like, because they see me, I ride. I actually had to change my path because I was riding by, on my same street, there are people I work with who live towards the end of the street. And I got to the point where they were seeing me on my bike too much. So I switched my path, so I'm not passing their houses anymore.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that sounded just like him. That's why I was like, are you married to James White?
Sounds like a pretty good guy, actually. Sounds like he's
a very valuable resource for textual criticism and other, he wrote a book called The Forgotten Trinity, which is very interesting. You'll see some of the same material I use in my Trinity debate. He uses in his debates on the Trinity. He wrote the King James only controversy, which came out a long time ago about the King James onlyism when that was a big thing, and just a great resource overall.
That sounds good. Well, actually, you know what? I better get going because I actually just remembered I've got to submit the grades for some students' presentations from last night. So, and I've been putting it off.
Well, thanks so
You
much
can
for
only,
having me.
yeah, I really enjoy having you on. I want to see, I'm going to put the link to your channel in here, but can you share how people can reach you on Twitter or any other places that we can find you?
Sure. If you want to follow me, don't feel obligated. But if you want to subscribe, Converse Contender on YouTube. It's easy to find. On Twitter, you can only put in so many characters, so it was Converse Contend without the ER. And that's pretty much it for now. Like, it just, those two resources are the only thing I really use. I don't like Facebook, and I have a personal Instagram, but I don't get on it with on my Converse Contender yet. So also I have a Discord now that MathPig made for me last night, but I don't really know how to use it that well. So you're going to see a lot more discussions and things that I'm going to be on anyway. So hopefully they'll put the link in the description for those. And
I'll definitely do that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. How often are you planning on putting these debates and things like that up on your channel? How busy is your channel going to be is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, typically Monday through Wednesday, I'm doing either a live stream on my channel, or I'm doing a debate on somebody else's channel, or I'm doing an after show from a debate, pretty much almost every night, Monday through Wednesday. My fiance works third shift as a charge nurse in a hospital, and so those are my nights free. And instead of, now that I'm not in construction anymore, I'm not building furniture and all that stuff, I'm kind of enjoying not cutting my hand and smashing my thumb and those kind of things. So I'm spending my first part of my week on YouTube and having some great discussions and improving my knowledge, edifying myself, as I think everyone should.
That's fantastic.
Again, thanks for having me again.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm just looking. I just want to say something really quickly. Stupid whore energy. And that's what this person calls says, I've had 3,000 moderated debates and I've lost none. And Brian Stevens says, you are really trying to catch up to Apologist Supreme. It's really funny.
Yeah. I like both of them. I always see her in chat. She seems to be always in all the debates and chats. So
yeah, she is. She's on Modern Day Debate a lot.
Yeah, she's pretty generous with her super chats as well. So, but just don't at her. So that's what she always says. Don't at me.
Oh yeah, really? I didn't notice that.
And Brian Stevens, what's up to him as well? I like Brian.
Yeah, everybody, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And please like and subscribe, and do come again. So I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Here we go.